Hello and welcome back to another video. I hope you're good. I hope all is well. Today is a bit different. This is the first part to a long series which is going to take me months, if not a few years, to complete. And it is all based on this challenge that's been going on around the internet more or less, but that I've actually challenged myself to for completely separate reasons, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that is to read a book written by an author of every single country in the world. That's a lot of countries. I just googled it real quick. There's 195 countries in the world. In this first video, I'm going to introduce you to the challenge, why I chose to do this, how I went about doing it. I'm at the very beginning of it, but how I'm going about it, the first steps, the following steps. I'm going to be talking about the different books I've already read within this challenge, and we're going to judge them. I'll tell you later how exactly we're going to go about doing that. So let's get right into it with why this idea came to me and the actual points behind this challenge. For a tiny bit of background context, I'm half French, half South African, and I grew up in Europe most of my life, but in a pretty international area. So I'm acquainted with people of countries all around the world, but obviously my reading did not quite follow, and I've read books mostly from the UK and the US as well as France because I'm French. So this summer I unintentionally read 3 books written by 3 authors of 3 different Eastern countries. I unfortunately only have one of them on me because I lent the 2 other ones to friends, but I read The Unbearable Lightness of Milan Kundera by a Czech author, The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov, a Russian author, and Swimming in the Dark by Jodorowsky, a Polish author. And in doing so, I was introduced to 3 completely different backdrops of the ones I'm used to from my own life or even from books I've read. Notably, the Prague Spring in 1968, Warsaw in the 1980s, and Stalin Moscow. And through these books and their backdrops, I learned in an engaging and more fun, as in less scholarly way, of individual as well as collective histories of these countries. You're learning a history of a specific person or character based on real life, on the real political movements that were going on, and on the consequences that this had on the people. And this differs from learning about history in a scholarly context, because your history books are not written by people who actually lived through these things most of the time, and they hide and structure it in a way that's easy to learn because it's for school most of the time, but it's not personal. It's very impersonal, the history we learn at school or sometimes in documentaries. Whereas learning it in this way, although completely unintentional, my main idea was picking up each of these books was not let me find out more about Warsaw or Prague or Moscow, etc. It was to read something, but the context of the book is infused within the literature and you take away from it in a completely different way, which I found so interesting, and it made me realize how little I knew about the East and about the Communist Party in the East and how it affected the people. And by reading it, it felt a bit more personal because I was getting the experience from a character, although fictionless to a certain extent, obviously inspired by real life people and real life happenings. And this unintentional shift towards Eastern literature made me realize the opportunity that lays in diversifying the background of our books, of our readings, of our authors. This led to the conclusion that I want to diversify my reading. I want to give authors from all corners of the world a chance to enchant me and to show me more of their lives, their experience, their culture. Now how I went about it. The first step was I made a list on paper in my little booklet. I think the best way to track your readings is on paper. It feels more personal, it feels more real. But I made a list of every single country based by region and in an alphabetical order, and I used a list on Google. The main point of this was just that it be structured in a way that's easy for me to find the countries. Then I went through all the books I've read somewhat recently. I wanted to give myself some wiggle room because these are a lot of countries to go through. I also track my books on Goodreads, so that was super helpful for this. I looked through them, and then each and every book I looked at the author's origin and I plugged it in: Czech-Republic, Immortality, Kundera, no. I also put a little note on whether it was a man or a woman, the author, because I thought that's interesting also to think of, especially in different cultures. I've accumulated 16 countries so far, which is Very far from the 195 goal, but I think a decent start. And then I asked my Instagram for more recommendations. I put it on my stories, a little box. I'm fortunate enough to have a very, very international following. So I got about 50 recommendations, which is a great, great start. And I wanted to do this more recommendation based so that I could get people from different countries recommendation. Do you understand what I mean? And I didn't want to just go on TikTok and get all the like TikTok famous books of each country of the world. I wanted it more personal, which leads me to your mission. Please let me know any recommendation you have of international writers. So that means avoiding UK, US, and France. Although if you have an exceptional book of either of these countries, let me know as well. I'd love to know. Add them all to my list, about like 3 pages with the country and everything. How I'm gonna go about this now is that every second book I read needs to be from a new country on my list. That's because I don't want to limit myself in my reading. Often also books come to you when they're supposed to come to you, and if a book comes my way, if I find out about a new book and it strikes my interest and I look at the author and it's a UK author, I've already read so many books from the UK, I don't want to put that on postpones for months or years foreseeable. I read about 20 books a year, give or take, usually a bit more. 195 divided by 20, we have a long way to go. We have a long, long way to go. And I didn't want to put any other reading on hold just to do this challenge, just to complete this journey. Obviously, I'm going to try and read as many international books as possible. And I think also like a lot of the recommendations I got have me very, very excited. Reading to me is more than just a checklist. It's more than just reading as many books as possible. It's enriching, and there's a lot of books on my to be read list of authors I've read before, authors from countries which I am already acquainted with, and I don't want to completely put that on hold for the upcoming years, literally. And I will make a video to update the progress with every 6 new country I discover. So stay tuned, like, follow, comment, and subscribe to watch more. And subscribe on Instagram as well. I'll be posting on there, particularly on my close friend story. If you want to join the close friend story for polls and updates on YouTube and sometimes like personal life kind of, DM me, no shame about it. I know it can be a bit awkward, but literally just be like, hey, please add me to close friends and I'll add you. And I love having you guys there. And I'll definitely keep you guys updated on this journey. So make sure to do that. Let's get into the books which I have already read. There's about 16 books on here, so this is definitely a big chunk. And I'm going to be judging them on different criteria. First, my overall opinion. So that was reading experience, impact the book had on me, and language. Although obviously language is a bit more complicated because many of these are works in translation. And then I'm also going to judge the book on the link it has to its country, as in if it's actually insightful in learning more about the author's nation. I understand that that's not every author's goal, and I understand that we'll have amazing books from international authors that don't really depict the country or its culture, which is completely fine. I just want to talk about it because the main idea of this was to learn more about the cultures through literature. So it's important to note, I think, especially if you guys want to go on a similar journey. Let's get straight into it. Where's my little notebook? We're going to go about it the way I have it written down in my little notebook. So that's by geographical location and then in alphabetical order. There's some geographical areas which I have not at all touched yet, so it's time to change that. But let's first dive into what we have. We're going to be starting in Belgium with a very popular book at the moment, and that is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. I'm going to read you the Goodreads summary, just so you have an idea. Deep underground, 40 women live imprisoned in a cage. Watched over by guards, the women have no memory of how they got there, no notion of time, and only a vague recollection of their lives before. As the burn of electric light merges day into night and numberless years pass, a young girl, the 40th prisoner, sits alone and outcast in a corner. Soon she will show herself to be the key to the others' escape and survival in the strange world that awaits them above ground. So, super interesting. Super interesting. The reading experience for me was cold and very uncomfortable, which is the exact point, and which also showcases that your reading experience isn't a key teller of whether it's a good book or not, or at least not necessarily. I was uncomfortable reading this book. I didn't have a swell time. I wasn't excited to flip the pages, but I think that's precisely the point. It's gruesome and dystopian and really uncomfortable, and Hartman did this wonderfully. So despite me not having a swell time while reading it, it is arguably one of the most impactful books I've read in a long time. I think about it all the time, and I believe that everyone should read it. It really makes you question everything. It makes you question memory and life and what we hold important to life, and the difference between survival and living. And it casts a kind of gendered question as well, but less than you'd expect from the title, I guess. It's a very, very interesting read, and I've never read anything else like it, so I would definitely recommend. However, as it takes place in a dystopian desert-like world, it has no real link to Belgium, so it might not be the best pick if your intention is to learn more about the country of the French fry. Next on Czech Republic, brought to you by Milan Kundera, one of my new favorite authors. I read The Unbearable Lightness of Being, stunning, and then Immortality right after by Kundera because I love The Unbearable Lightness of Being so much. But we're going to be talking more about The Unbearable Lightness of Being than Immortality because Immortality takes place in Paris. So, in The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Milan Kundera tells the story of a young woman in love with a man torn between his love for her and his incorrigible womanizing, and one of his mistresses and her humbly faithful lover. This magnificent novel juxtaposes geographically distant places, brilliant and playful reflections, and a variety of styles to take its place as perhaps the major achievement of one of the world's truly great writers. This is honestly one of my new favorite books. It's profound and enlightening and rich and philosophical. It will have you thinking about literally everything, meaning we attribute to words and symbols, love, friendships, the body, how to live in a politically corrupt time. It's magnificently done. It is strange and confusing, but genuinely all encompassing, and I could not recommend this more. Kundera was an activist against the communist movement in Czech Republic, and he was expulsed of the Communist Party twice. His books were banned in Czech Republic. He moved to Paris so he could write freely. So this has some controversy in the Czech population because he is by a lot of natives not considered a Czech writer since he abandoned his country to be able to write more freely. One of my best friends is Czech, and we spoke about this, and I thought that was so fascinating because obviously to someone who's not Czech, Milan Kundera is the Czech writer, but this just shows how the more you know, the more you know. It takes place in Prague during the spring of 1968, a very, very important time politically speaking that was corrupt and quite frankly very hard to live in. And although it's not the main focus of the novel, Kundera focuses more on the relationship between the characters, the philosophy of their lives. It is a very, very, very strong background, and it is inescapable within the story, and you will learn more. And it also shows the way your political background affects and shapes your life and how you go about it. I think about this book, I kid you not, daily. I recommended it to everyone I know. I've gone walking around the streets, walking to university, thinking about my friendships and what they meant to me and why they meant what they meant and what we had in common and what we had differently, and so much. Honestly, a beautiful book. Please read it. Very much, please read it. Moving on, quite a few here. La la la. Moving on to France. This is a handful that I just got from right behind me to show you that I've read quite a few French books. I'm French. I like to read. We have great literature, inescapable. Anyway, I've read quite a bit. Some of the notable ones are The Stranger by Albert Camus, Lie With Me by Philippe Besson, Mémoire de Fille by Annie Ernaux. Definitely read Annie Ernaux. But most importantly, and unfortunately I don't have it on me, although it is my favorite book probably ever, and that is Hello Sadness, Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Sagan. I read this book quite a few years ago in the dead middle of winter, which was very much depressing because the book takes place in the south of France under the sparkling sun. I was under a gray sky, cold as can be, highly depressed, but it did not change the fact that it's a beautiful book and it shaped my new summer tradition, which is to start every single summer with a Sagan novel. I've been doing this for 4 years now, and it's wonderful, and I can't recommend her more. Hello Sadness is beautifully written. It is melancholic and dramatic as a teenage girl can be. Bear in mind, this was written by Sagan when she was freshly 18 and is now a classic worldwide and one of the most renowned books in France. It is infused with the French art de vivre and drama and relationships. It's very much coming of age. Oh, I need to read you the I haven't read you the. Sorry. It explores the themes of love, jealousy, and the complexities of parental relationships through the eyes of a young girl named Cécile. Set in a picturesque villa in the south of France, the story unfolds during a carefree summer spent by Cécile and her charming but irresponsible father Raymond, along with his current mistress, Elsa. The dynamic shifts when Anne, a cultured and principled friend of Raymond's deceased wife, arrives, causing tension as Cécile grapples with her father's growing attachment to Anne. Cécile fears the hedonistic lifestyle and the potential loss of her father's attention, prompting her to devise a scheme that inadvertently leads to a tragic consequence. It's beautiful. It's so dramatic and it's beautiful, and you need to read it. And as I was saying, I'm sorry, I got really, really, really passionate and forgot that you might not even know what it's about, but it's infused with this French lifestyle, art de vivre. The summers are so typically French, and there's no deep link with the history. So in that sense, I don't know how much you'll learn about France in itself, but it is a very French book. And it's beautiful, and you should read it regardless of if you're doing this challenge or not. It feels wrong to call this a challenge because when I say challenge, I think of 75 Hard or the Cinnamon Challenge, and this isn't a challenge, it's more of a journey, but that feels so long, you know what I mean? I'm gonna keep calling it challenge, but bear in mind that I mean goal, I mean journey. I can't think of another word that encapsulates it better, but I think we understand each other. Next is Germany. I've actually read quite a lot of German books. I did a large part of my schooling in German, so I had a lot of required reading in German, mostly about World War II, and I don't really like to speak German, so I didn't really like to read in German, which is not to say that German literature isn't good. It was a very much personal note. But I read quite a lot of books, but a long time ago, back at school. But the one I'm going to be talking about today is Perfume by Patrick Suskind. It's very famous and it's been kind of doing its rounds on the media at the moment. I'm going to read you the blurb. Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, born in a Parisian slum and abandoned on the streets, discovered he has an extraordinary, near superhuman sense of smell. As he sniffs his way across France, this gift is exploited by Grenouille to make the world's most marvelous perfumes. Yet, in seeking perfection in his experiments, he realizes that a vital ingredient is missing for the perfect scent: innocence. That sounds so captivating. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. It left me a bit underwhelmed. I think I was expecting more, which is odd because a lot of people whose book taste I very much respect and admire loved Perfume. So I think it's to each their own, you know, that's how it goes. However, as it is set in Paris and in France in general, I would not recommend this. Again, if your goal is to learn more about Germany, there's genuinely about 1,000,000 books on World War II, following World War II and the consequences that I would recommend before. One of them being Lily Under the Lindens. That's a kind of tree. I read this in German class way back when. It's about a young girl whose mom escaped East Germany 15 years prior, and her mother is now sick, and her sister, who still lives in the East, is trying to come over to visit, and it's really about the aftermath of the war and how it separated an entire country and its people. So if you want to read a German book more so based in history than Perfume, I would more so recommend this one. To Ireland, I read a couple Irish books. I read Normal People by Sally Rooney, which I must be honest, I didn't enjoy it that much. But I also read Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, which is one of my favorite Gothic books ever. Beautiful. If you're into Gothic literature, read this, as well as The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which is the book I'm going to be talking about now. Enthralled by his own exquisite portrait, Dorian Gray exchanges his soul for eternal youth and beauty. Influenced by his friend Lord Henry Wotton, he is drawn into a corrupt double life, indulging his desires in secret while remaining a gentleman in the eyes of polite society. Only his portrait bears the traces of his decadence. The Picture of Dorian Gray was a success scandale. Early readers were shocked by its hints at unspeakable sins. as the book was later used as evidence against Wilde at the Old Bailey in 1895. It's about an aristocrat's hedonistic worldview about beauty and sensual, more so sexual fulfillment, a libertine life of immoral experience and their consequences. It's a beautiful book, beautifully written. I found it so captivating. It's fast paced, it's enchanting, it's wonderful. There is no direct link to Ireland, it's more so of the high European aristocracy. So, very interesting nonetheless, but not in any way a historical novel. I do believe you should still read it though. It's a classic for a reason which I understand. We could not talk about Italy without talking about Elena Ferrante, who is mostly known for the Napolitan Quartet, which is the book I'm going to be talking about right now. I also read The Lying Life Adult and The Troubling Love. This is going to get me a lot of hate, but I need to be so honest. I'm not the biggest fan of Elena Ferrante, and I've given her a go. I've read 3 books. I've given her a go. Let me read you the summary first, so you can say for yourself if this is a book that might interest you, and then I'll get into it more. My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante tells the story of a lifelong complex friendship between Elena Greco and Raffaella, also called Lilla Cerullo, set in a working class neighborhood in Naples. So that's more or less it. It's not a plot heavy book, which I usually really like. It's very much character driven and a character analysis. I found it slightly dull, quite honestly. I found it a bit dull. I thought it was very interesting because it's a beautiful representation of Naples at the time and of the neighborhood's complex social dynamic. That's what stuck with me most. Of the actual story, I could not tell you much. It's admired for its complex analysis on friendship between women, which genuinely sounds like something that would right up my alley, like right up my alley, but it just wasn't for me. An international #1 bestseller though, so if it sounds like a topic that might interest you, you should definitely give it a try if you want to be immersed in Naples in the 1950s in a bit of a more complex neighborhood. Also give it a try and let me know what you thought. And if you love My Brilliant Friend, and please comment down below why, because this is really a book that on paper should check all of my boxes and somehow didn't really do it for me. But I would love to hear your experience with the book or the entire quartet if you read all 4 of them. Moving on. For the Netherlands, when I was about 14, I read This Is Where It Ends by Nishkamp, which is about a school shooting. That's all I remember. I don't know if I should count this towards the list because I don't remember any of it really. I was 14. I just remember it being about a school shooting. So if you're from the Netherlands, or if you read anything from a Dutch author and you liked it, let me know down below because I think this country doesn't really count on my list. Moving on to Poland, another book which started this list and which I unfortunately don't have on me, and that is Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jadrowski. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Let me read it to you. It is known as the Polish Call Me By Your Name, which I don't really like. I'm not a big fan of this nickname for it. I don't think that we should categorize any book by just saying it's this book from another country, and particularly not just because it is a queer and complicated relationship. That I feel like that's such a limiting thought. Like, there's more to this book than that. There's more to Call Me By Your Name than that. And there's a lot of factors that differentiate them. I think people call it that because it's a coming of age gay romance that takes place during the summer. But this is a lot more political than Call Me By Your Name. Set in early 1980s Poland against the violent decline of communism, a tender and passionate story of first love between 2 young men who eventually find themselves on opposite sides of the political divide. A stunningly poetic and heart-rending literary debut. Yes, if you like Call Me By Your Name, you most probably will like this as well. As you heard in the summary, the 2 main characters, which is Ludwig and Janusz, find themselves on opposite end of the political spectrum, with Ludwig being very critical of the Polish People's Republic and eventually fleeing, whereas Janusz is more supportive and tries to find a way to utilize it to his own benefit. It is emotional and insightful as it shows how 2 people who grew up in technically the same environment can interpret it very differently and can come out with very different ideas. And I feel like understanding this can make you a more compassionate person to other people, or more understanding person to other people's beliefs. It treads this fine line of to what extent should we accept or understand people's political views if they completely oppose yours. I don't know if you're following my drift, but point being, if you and a friend of yours or a loved one have different political views, are you to immediately set them aside? Are you to try and consider why they might think the way they think? can you still, even if you understand that you come from different backgrounds, can you still have a foundational friendship? I don't know if I'm being understood, but I thought it was super interesting. And I learned a lot about Poland's history and the different ways it affected people, which I quite frankly knew little to nothing about. Moving on to Russia, one of the most, for some reason, intimidating literature. I read White Nights by Dostoevsky, and recently I read The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov, which I lent to my boyfriend and don't have on me right now, but which is an exquisite satirical novel of Stalin's Russia. I'm going to read you the summary because I think we have a good rhythm going. One hot spring, the devil arrives in Moscow, accompanied by a retinue that includes a beautiful naked witch and an immense talking black cat with a fondness for chess and vodka. But they also bring peace to two unhappy Muscovites. One is the master, a writer pilloried for daring to write a novel about Christ and Pontius Pilate. I don't know if it's Pilat or Pilate, but the other is Margarita, who loves the master so deeply that she is willing, literally, to go to hell for him. What ensues is a novel of inexhaustible energy, humor, and philosophical depth, a work whose nuance emerged for the first time in Diana Bergen's and Catherine Sternon's O'Connor's splendid English version. I think that's the translation I read as. It feels like a fever dream. It's absurd and beautiful and mind-messing, if you know what I mean. It's such an interesting analysis of Moscow at the time, and I found a much deeper connection with the book once I had finished reading it and listened to a podcast that was actually connecting the dots between the country's history and the novel. Bulgakov was not allowed to write in Russia either. His books were banned, although him and Stalin had somewhat of a friendship. It was all a bit odd, but I would definitely recommend reading this book, and I would recommend listening to a podcast after. I recommend this in general, trying to deepen your understanding of a book, particularly if you liked it and particularly if it had a philosophical undertone. But this is definitely a beautiful book and a very, very interesting way to go about a troubling political landscape. Moving on to the UK, one of the countries where my stack is big, but I didn't want to get them all out, to be quite frank. I read a lot of UK books. I've read Robinson and Crusoe by Defoe, which I didn't like. I read Outline by Rachel Cusk, Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. I want to read more Winterson very, very soon. A classic, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. A gothic, absolute classic. You know the synopsis. Everyone knows the synopsis, but I'll read you it. Obsessed with creating life itself, Victor Frankenstein plunders graveyards for the material to fashion a new being, which shocks into life with electricity. But his botched creature, rejected by Frankenstein and denied human companionship, sets out to destroy his maker and all that he holds dear. Mary Shelley's chilling gothic tale was conceived when she was only 18. I didn't know that actually. That's crazy. Living with her lover, Percy Shelley, near Byron's villa on Lake Geneva. It would become the world's most famous work of horror fiction and remains a devastating exploration of the limits of human creativity. The book questions and criticizes the ethics behind scientific research, and which was very, very big at the time because there was still so much to discover, and which is very important nowadays with the rise of artificial intelligence and all of its consequences. I think what's particularly interesting in the book is the way Dr. Frankenstein creates this monster, this nameless monster, out of passion, out of desire, out of creativity and curiosity. And then once it doesn't resemble what he had in mind, once it scares him, he is so utterly terrified that he completely abandons it and villainizes the monster, which kind of ruins his life, but not out of evil, out of deep despair and sadness and loneliness. It is a beautiful book and mind-blowing that she wrote this at 18. It's a bit whiny and melodramatic, but that's what to expect from a gothic tale, and I absolutely loved it. Spain. Surprisingly, I've only ever read one Spanish book, and that is A Heart So White by Javier Marias. In the middle of a family lunch, Teresa, just married, goes to the bathroom, unbuttons her blouse, and shoots herself in the heart. What made her kill herself immediately after her honeymoon? Years later, this mystery fascinates the young newlywed Juan, whose father was married to Teresa before he married Juan's mother, Teresa's sister. As Juan edges closer to the truth, he begins to question his own relationships and whether he really wants to know what happened. Very unsettling, very beautiful. I read it this year and I don't remember that much, which I think in of itself is quite telling. It doesn't make it a bad book. It wouldn't go on the top of my list either though. And although I don't think it says that much about Spain itself, It talks a lot about the Spanish language because, and I think linguistics are so interesting. So I would recommend it for that. But yeah, honestly nothing striking to me. Moving on to North America, first and foremost, Canada. Bunny by Mona Award. Samantha Heather Mackey couldn't be more of an outsider in her small, highly selective MFA program at New England's Warren University. A scholarship student who prefers the company of her dark imagination to that of most people. She is utterly repelled by the rest of her fiction writing cohort, a clique of unbearably twee rich girls who call each other Bunny and seem to move and speak as one. But everything changes when Samantha receives an invitation to Bunny's fabled smut salon and finds herself inexplicably drawn to their front door, ditching her only friend Ava in the process. As Samantha plunges deeper and deeper into the Bunny's sinister yet saccharine world, beginning to take part in the ritualistic off-campus workshop where they conjure their monstrous creations, the edges of reality begin to blur. Soon, her friendship with Ava and the bunnies will be brought into deadly collision. The synopsis is so captivating, and yet it left me very much unmarked. I didn't have a good experience reading it personally. I was not the biggest fan. I think it's more an analysis on the art school of very rich people, like the twee girl scene, than of Canadian culture. And actually, this made me realize that I know very little about Canada and should probably read more. Moving on to the USA, I've read far too many. I've read many. The list is much wider than this. Amongst others, we have The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, Queer by William S. Burroughs, as well as Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, which I highly recommend. Please do yourself a favor and read this. But the book I'm going to be talking about today, I don't have on me, sadly, Slow Days in Fast Company by Eve Babbitt. I love Eve Babbitt. Eve Babbitt captured the voluptuous quality of LA in the 1960s in a wildly original, totally unique voice. These stories are time capsule gems, as poignant and startling today as they were when published in the early 1970s. An unforgettable glimpse at a lost world and a magical time. Dazzling and drunken, beautifully written. It's warm and lively and memorable, honestly. It makes you want to get up and live your life and maybe party a little too hard, but in a fun, chic, I don't care kind of way. It encapsulates a very specific scene in Los Angeles, notably Hollywood, and the party people, the artists, the drunks. It's beautiful and I love it. I think she's a very much underappreciated American writer, and we should change that. Moving on to Asia, starting with India and White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. The White Tiger offers a story of coruscating wit, blistering suspense, and questionable morality, told by the most volatile, captivating, and utterly inimitable narrator that this millennium has yet seen. Balram Halvai is a complicated man, servant, philosopher, entrepreneur, murderer. Over the course of 7 nights, by the scattered light of a preposterous chandelier, Balram tells us a terrible and transfixing story of how he came to be a success in life, having nothing but his own wits to help him along. It tells a story of India's class struggle in a globalized world through a dark, humorous lens, and talks about the caste system and the wildly different experiences that can be found within India based on your class and family you were fortunate or unfortunate to be born into. As the author himself says, it attempts to catch the voice of the men you meet as you travel through India, the voice of the colossal underclass. It's a bit gruesome and horrible at some parts, but I think it's very raw and authentic, and it's a bit long and funny, and it was a very weird book, as in very different from anything else I've ever read, so I can't really compare it to anything, but it does give you somewhat of a deep understanding of the caste system in India. I would recommend. I think it's a good book to learn more about India and to dive into a completely different kind of narrator. The Balram is no other narrator resembles him. Moving on to Japan, I have quite a few books, and for some reason I have none of them on me. I read Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro. That's not the actual book I want to talk about today for Japan though. I want to talk about The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles by Murakami, which I read for school, which was long and confusing, but undoubtedly intriguing. Heroically imaginative novel, which is at once a detective story, an account of a disintegrating marriage, and an excavation of the buried secrets of World War II. In a Tokyo suburb, a young man named Toru Okada searches for his wife's missing cat. Soon, he finds himself looking for his wife as well in a netherworld that lies beneath the placid surface of Tokyo. As these searches intersect, Okada encounters a bizarre group of aliens and antagonists. A psychic prostitute, a malevolent yet mediogenic politician, a cheerfully morbid 16-year-old, and an aging war veteran who has been permanently changed by the hideous things he witnessed during Japan's forgotten campaign in Manchuria. Gripping, prophetic, suffuses comedy and menace. The Wind-Up Chronicle is a tour de force equal in scope to the masterpieces of Mishima and Pinecone. I think that's a pretty good synopsis. It's non-linear, it's philosophical and kind of surrealist and weird. It's representative of how World War II impacted Japan, of what we give for war, and it makes you question what we should be giving for war, as well as of the Japanese work ethic and how it can lead to alienation of gender norms in Japan as well. As someone who knows very little of Japan initially, I'm going to be so honest with you guys, I didn't know what to take for real and what part of it were so transformed by the surrealist element. So I don't know if it's the best novel to go about if your main objective is learning about Japan, but it's definitely interesting and a mindfuck, and it will definitely get you spiraling a little bit. Moving on to the Middle East, I only so far have Turkey. I have 2 books from Turkey though. Madonna in a Fur Coat by Sabahat Ali and The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. I'll be talking about The Island of Missing Trees because first and foremost, I wasn't the biggest fan of Madonna in a Fur Coat, and also it takes place in Berlin. So okay, the protagonist is Turkish. He's very dull. I'm really not a big fan of this book. And I don't understand why so many people are. Again, if you are, let me know. Let me know. I'm so open to talking about it. I'm so open. The Island of Missing Trees. 2 teenagers, a Greek Cypriot and a Turkish Cypriot, meet at a taverna on the island they both call home, Cyprus. In the taverna, hidden beneath garlands of garlic, chili peppers, and creeping honeysuckle, Kostas and Daphne grow into their forbidden love for each other. A fig tree stretches through a cavity in the roof, and this tree bears witness to their hushed, happy meetings and eventually to their silent, surreptitious departures. The tree is there when the war breaks out, when the capital is reduced to ash and rubble, and when the teenagers vanish. Decades later, Costas returns. He's a botanist looking for native species, but really, he's searching for lost love. Very well written, super captivating, got me right out of a reading slump. Not necessarily the most philosophical, which is something I tend to like in my books, but I found it really captivating, as I said. I learned so much. I knew close to nothing about Cyprus, really close to nothing, and about the civil war, about the conflict between 2 nations who ultimately want the same thing. I can only recommend, genuinely. For Central America, I have nothing. Leave your recommendations down below. Thank you very much. South America, I have only read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. 100 Years of Solitude tells the story of the exotic and tragic Bonita family who conquered the city of Macondo from the swamp more than a century before the city met its apocalyptical end. Natural disasters, exploitation, and merciless wars define the history of the Bonitas, whose founder, José Arcadio, an ambitious amateur alchemist, proves among other things that the world is round, a meaningful, if belated, discovery. This was such a long read. Magical surrealism, which is a bit of an odd genre in my opinion, although interesting. Very confusing, and additionally, it goes across 6 generations of this family, and tell me why they named all of their kids the same way. Additionally, it's slightly incestual. Let me show you the family tree, because this had me so, I'm really terrible with names, and this had me so confused because why is he Aureliano Bonita, Aureliano Jose, Aurelianos, Jose Arcadio, Aureliano Segundo, Jose Arcadio. Please. However, it is a highly renowned book for a reason, despite it not appealing to me. It tells the story of the creation of Macondo, an island and world created in accordance to the founders' views, and which is isolated from the rest of the world, as well as how it evolves once globalization kind of breaks through to the island. The government of newly independent Colombia affects this little, so far isolated island through rigged elections and civil wars and globalization, etc. It is supposedly one of the texts that Latin American culture has created to understand itself. And quite frankly, maybe this is because I'm not Latin American. I do not understand it. I really wish I did. I think there's a lot of wisdom in this book, but maybe I should reread it. But honestly, That doesn't sound very appealing right now. I feel bad because I feel like there's quite a lot of books that I read on this list which I didn't love, but that's part of reading, and I think that's just as valuable sometimes as the books that you do love. And then I do not have anything for sub-Saharan Africa or Oceania, which again I would like to change, so please leave any recommendations down below. How I'll be moving forward with this challenge, as I said, every second book is going to be international. The next book I want to read is Aqua Viva by Clarice Lispector, a Brazilian author. And after that, we shall see. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know any thoughts and opinions. Like, follow, comment, subscribe, follow me on Instagram as well. And I'm so happy to have you for the ride.